My next guest is Adrian Gordon. Adrian is an active performer, composer, and music educator living in Charlotte, North Carolina. His colorful compositions are captivating for musicians of all ages, from very easy to advanced levels. Over the years, Gordon has written several acclaimed works for string orchestra, such as Apocalypse and The Song of the Ocean Winds, to name a few. Adrian takes pride in creating music that is fun and pedagogically sound at all levels. Mr. Gordon currently serves as the orchestra director at Providence Day School in Charlotte, North Carolina. He received his BA in music from the University of Miami and his master's degree in music education at Florida International University. In addition to teaching, Mr. Gordon is a composer with Alfred Music Publishing and the founder of Leap Year Music Publishing, which publishes string music for elementary, middle, and high school ensembles. His compositions appear on the California, Florida, Texas, Maryland, and Georgia Orchestra Association music performance assessment lists. His compositions are also distributed through J.W. Pepper and have been performed throughout the world. Adrian resides in Charlotte with his wife, Kelly, and their two sons. Welcome to the podcast, Adrian.
Thank you so much for having me, Dana.
Well, I connected with you because I've heard you on another podcast, James Devine's podcast, and he's also a music educator, and I haven't had that many music educators on my podcast, so I'm excited to talk with you about your composition and your music publishing. But let's start off with the question I ask everybody. Tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Well, I would say that was in my last position, my previous position. I was in a tough spot and kind of was the genesis for writing the book. But I had been in several different positions before, different roles, and was quite successful, what I deemed quite successful. But as I transitioned into that position, things were difficult, and I had to really sit down and think about why were things so difficult here. So I was journaling, I was conversing with my best friend, I was just trying to flesh out all these ideas on why am I having a hard time during this transition. And through all of that, I started coming up with the ideas for the book. But in that particular transition, I was in a tough spot where I guess that particular school was not very accepting of my outlook on education.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was very much of the mindset that students can achieve, and we have to assume that they can achieve, not assume that they can't. And regardless of where they are, you meet them where they are. In my case, being a musician, a music educator, whether they're playing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or playing a major symphony, we expect for those students to reach their personal best, and we don't set the standard low for them. So the previous school that I was at was not very fond of that kind of thinking. And I just kind of equated it to when we install lights in our house or when we light a candle, we expect to get light.
Mm-hmm.
We don't install lights in our house to turn them off or to always have them off. Just as when you are enlisting in the discipline of music, it is meant to be played and played to be recognizable and played well. And unless you set those standards and meet kids where they are and expect and assume that you can do this, I think it's kind of a disservice. So the outlook that the school was having was, in my opinion, quite toxic and not appreciative of what I was trying to offer the kids. And I had to really think about my own worth as a professional and decide whether or not that was an environment that I wanted to stay in. And I learned a lot from that position, and that did help me write a lot of the book, and hopefully offer value and help to others who are in similar situations. But yeah, that was probably a time where it was quite toxic, and I had to figure out, catch my bearings and figure out what I wanted to do.
And we'll talk a little bit about your book, Note to Self, and a little bit. I wanted to talk, though, about how you got started playing music, what age you got started with, and maybe what instrument you started with.
Yeah, I started pretty young. I started probably when I was, I want to say maybe 8 years old or so. And I would sit and watch my mom play piano. I was telling my wife the other day, I was pulling up some of the pieces she used to play on piano, and I can it's so vivid. I can even smell
Mhm.
dinner in the kitchen, and watching her and listening to her play, and her going back and forth between playing piano and cooking dinner. So those memories are quite fun and vivid. But I would watch her play piano, and I would sit and try and mimic what she was doing, and I got pretty good at it. And I guess they noticed that I had my parents noticed I had some talent in music, so they forced me into a magnet music program when I was in sixth grade, and from
Mhm.
there it just kind of blossomed. So I was playing piano. I also was singing quite a bit in a chorus, and I got shoved into a magnet music program and started playing violin. And we didn't
Okay.
have a lot of money, but I had to teach myself how to play, and it just kind of stuck. And all throughout my middle school and high school years, I played. And then was also I was in a choir in high school, and then I started picking up guitar in high school
Okay.
as well. And then that led into being in a band, and so there's just so many natural progressions
Yeah.
for me to be involved with music, and those opportunities were there in school and outside of school. So it just kind of stuck, and then I ended up going to University of Miami and studying music. um, I was a music business major, and then I had my violin as the principal instrument. So it kind of just stuck with me, and I couldn't picture doing anything else.
Yeah, it's definitely something that you've had throughout you being raised and going into that magnet school. And as I told you, I've been in choir since middle school, but
Mhm.
did not go into music as my profession, but am still involved, heavily in choirs, and that's a large part of my
Yeah,
life. I'd love to have been able to play more than just, a little bit of my voice part on the piano, but
right.
you know,
And,
it's
I share that with my students too.
yeah,
As you get older, the body ages. You can't do all the
sure.
sports and physical activities that you're doing when you're young, but you can always sing and play your instrument.
Yeah,
That's something to
yeah,
think about.
yeah, definitely, definitely. Well, tell me about the age of your students at Providence Day School, and you have some compositions on your website. So, talk to me. I talked a little bit in your bio about some of those, but um, did you start writing compositions more for kids that you teach, or was it just more for just teachers in general to use?
Um, well, the first composition I did was back in when I was in seventh grade. I just started
Mhm.
scribbling stuff in a staff pad that I had.
Yeah.
But once I finished college, I always said, I would love to write stuff like quartets and music like that. And I just took a stab at it when I finished college, and it kind of stuck. And I had to learn all the instruments. And once I understood the ranges and the capabilities of all the instruments, I felt like, hey, all this information. Why not write music
Mhm.
for these instruments? So I ended up just starting writing stuff. I think I wrote a trio, which was one of my first pieces for two violins and cello. And then I started writing something for a string orchestra. And the most exciting part was hearing it played by other people.
Mhm.
So when I first started, I had no intention really. I don't. Well, I guess I thought about, hey, maybe what if I compose something and I sent it to one of these major publishing houses. Um, so I would put it in front of the students blind. They didn't know it was my
Okay.
and I wanted to get a reaction and see what they thought of the piece. And they enjoyed it. They were enjoying the music,
Mhm.
and then I would in turn send it to these publishing houses just to see what they thought and see if it was something that they'd be interested in publishing. But I would keep getting these resounding no's, like, no, we're
Mhm.
not interested in your material. And I'm thinking, what's the disconnect between what the students are doing in the classroom and what people in these boardrooms are seeing in the
Yeah.
publishing house? So I got frustrated, and I said, you know what? And not in a conceited way, I think what I'm doing is special. And I'm proud of the work that I'm putting out. And to me, it seems as special as something like a leap year.
Yeah.
So that's where I kind of started thinking about being the change that I wanted to see in my own life. And hey, why not come up with your own publishing company called Leap Year Music? So I started making Leap Year Music and pushing my own music out there because I was just kind of in love with the process and also hearing what was once in my head out in the world. And, fast forward with 13, 14 years later, I've been publishing my own work and putting all that stuff out through Leap Year Music. So that's been the process, the path that I've taken.
But then you've also had JW Peppard pick up a lot of your music as well that you sell through their site.
Yeah, so they're my biggest distributor or vendor for the music that I write. Um, and I have a couple other several other vendors around the country that will sell my music, and then I also sell it online. It's been a pleasure to see a lot of it popping up online on YouTube, different groups, soloists playing some of my stuff. I was very fortunate just the other day to have one of my solo pieces for violin performed by a great violinist named Rachel Barton Pine. So I
Mm.
felt really honored by that to hear my music out in the world and people appreciating it. And I feel humbled by stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's just going to keep being played, and more music is going to get out there as time goes on.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's got to be exciting. So you mentioned that you compose a lot of string music. Do you do mostly classical style, or are there other styles of music that you compose?
Well, so I compose music for elementary, middle, and high school, and it's basically in the educational realm. Although, what music isn't educational? One could argue. But yeah, so it's for elementary, middle, and high, and a lot of it is straightforward, traditional style. But I do have a few pieces which kind of push more into the contemporary realm that almost feel like cinematic. Um,
Hmm.
one of the pieces that you mentioned, Apocalypse, it's kind of one of my darker works where it's really cool to play, I think. And from what I've heard from students, it's a string orchestra piece that mixes strings with a bass drum. So it has this
Hmm.
very ominous, dark sound, and it sounds like it's straight out of a movie. So there's stuff like that I also compose that's not strictly classical. So I try and
Hmm.
mix it up a bit to keep it interesting and fun for students at all levels.
Hmm. Hmm. And so you do, and in your classes, have kids that are from beginners to seasoned players like yourself when you were that age.
Yeah, so I have some really beginning stuff that maybe like a student who's been playing like 3, 4, or 5 months can play, and stuff that advanced groups can play. And that's the idea, just to be engaging with all levels of students, and it keeps my brain fresh and
Hmm.
keeps me on my toes as a teacher. I think what helps is being an educator in the classroom. I'm also a conductor and then a composer, and all three roles kind of inform one another and help me be better at the other. So I feel like I'm a better conductor because I'm also a music educator. I'm a better music educator because I'm a composer, and so on and so forth. So all those roles help with my career and just help me be a better musician.
Hmm. Hmm. So you also do workshops on your website that there's information about them, but is this mostly something where you're maybe teaching about some of the pieces that you've composed, or is it conducting? Tell me a little bit about what you do, either virtually or in person for other schools.
Yeah, I've done both, which is a lot of fun. I was just recently, just this week actually, was able to work with a school. A lot of schools will call me or contact me, email me, and say, "Hey, we'd love for you to come work with our students on some of your music," which is always a huge honor. And I'll get to do some coaching and do rehearsal with them, give feedback, do Q&A with them, and just offer a unique perspective that you don't normally get to hear from a living composer. A lot of the times our kids are playing music from people who have long gone, and they don't get to hear that unique perspective of why did I do something like this as opposed to something like that.
Mhm.
So that's always special for the kids to be able to meet the composer and get a really up close and personal interpretation of the music. So
Mhm.
yeah, I do a lot of that, and yeah, and I like them both. I like it online. A lot of times I'll have the conductor, they'll be my proxy, and they will lead the ensemble, and I can work with the students and uh, kind of point out things that need to be fixed or things that they're doing really well that are really meeting my intention. And then the students can always ask me questions, which is a lot of fun too, to hear what they're thinking about the music. And then same thing in person. In person is great because I get to actually conduct and really work and coach the students up close and personal, which I really enjoy that too. So I do a lot of that. I've been doing a lot of that for the past couple of years now, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, just thinking about that. Sometimes with some of the pieces we sing in my chorus, I'd love to be able to ask some of those composers who are still
Right.
around, they just live other places, why they made that certain arrangement for that part. And
Mhm.
like, some of the notes that just clash with the other voice parts. And they did it
Right.
for a certain reason, right? Right. But
Yeah.
it's like
And
it would
and
be
you know
nice
that's
to know.
and that's the great thing about our evolving technology where we can meet virtually and I can
Yeah.
explain a lot of those ideas to the students. Um, so that's been a lot of fun. It doesn't have to be, oh, you live across the country, we can't talk to you. No, we can meet up in real time.
Yeah, yeah. So you have your book on the screen behind you. Note to Self: A Music Director's Guide for Transitioning to a New School and Building a Thriving Music Program. So you talked a little bit in your Trent story about what personal stories you brought to the book, but also what does it lead in terms of, or what does it lend in terms of your somebody who is moving to a school that might not have much of a music program or has a music program that's being defunded or has lost a lot of interest in recent years. What people to be able to find in your book about that?
Well, the first thing I would say is probably think about yourself. And I
Mm-hmm.
know that seems counterintuitive, but first taking care of yourself because the
Yeah.
job won't take care of you. So as music educators and as educators in general, we have to think about self-care, which is not really talked about a lot, but teaching is so hard and it's so demanding physically and emotionally and mentally all day, every day. We rarely just leave work at work. So I would say, for one, think about taking care of yourself. Um, and then after that, think about your purpose, why you're doing what you're doing. Remember that you're in the field of people and that you're there to um, help students and care for students. And that music happens to be the vehicle to do that. And then beyond that, there's some real practical things that we can do as educators to prepare ourselves. But I go through some of those things in the book, like connecting with your outgoing director if you possibly can, so you get a little background on where the program has been, where you intended it to go, and it didn't go, or it did go. Um, Also, I think one of the big things is helpful is yearbook study. It goes a long way to know quite a few names when you show up on day one, students and faculty, to know who to find and where to go. So I think that's also really helpful. I also advocate for finding a mentor, even if it's not within your department, just somebody that knows the culture, knows the layout of the building and how things are done, and connecting with that person, writing things down, making sure that you're absorbing as much as you can from them. Um, and then I also talk about in the book like developing a beginning of the year checklist so you're not completely overwhelmed. A lot of times, as educators, we go in on the first couple days, and the first thing your administrators do, which mind you, they would never ask students to do, is they sit you down in meetings all day, and you're expected to just sit there and absorb all
Yeah.
this material. And the whole time you're feeling really nervous about getting your classroom ready and getting everything ready to go. So I advocate going through your checklist, and making sure that you're not having all these stray ideas and being able to knock them out one at a time. So I provide a checklist in the book that helps teachers kind of focus what they're going to do and work on when they get to school. And I also advocate for doing like a meet and greet with the students if you can ahead of time, like a promotional video that introduces yourself if you can't make it there ahead of time, or a welcome letter that kind of talks about who you are as an educator, your history, and what your outlook is, and stating your vision, and also getting students and even parents involved with the
Mhm.
vision, and agreeing to here's where we're going, and getting everybody signed on to that. So those are just a couple of things that I would recommend that I go through in the book, about starting off a brand new school year.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, this podcast will be released close to the beginning of the school year, and that's definitely worthy things to know, whether or not you've just started your career, or you're a veteran teacher just transitioning to a new school, right? And I like that yearbook study. I think that would apply to everybody when they get hired at a
Yeah.
school, just to kind of know, yeah, there might be a certain amount of turnover, but try to get a hold of a
Yeah.
yearbook. And see also, like, lets you know a lot about the clubs, and like any
Mhm.
school with the performing arts, then how many different orchestras and ensembles they have. And you might not be able to find all that out on the website or the interview. So yeah, it's definitely
Right.
good looking into
And then
those things.
also,
Yeah.
yeah, and then also for, particularly for music educators, I advocate for seeing if you can get a hold of some past concert program booklets,
Okay.
and that's going to give you a great idea as to the level that the students are playing at. So when you're coming in, you're not, of course, you're going to have to do your own diagnostic, but you can kind of tell, okay, we're in this range, maybe a
Mhm.
grade 1 to grade 2 for this type of group. And I'm not coming in completely, off guard and
Yeah.
blind. So that's another helpful tip for teachers who are starting out the school year.
Great tips, great tips. So a lot of the music educators that I know or have interviewed for the podcast, I know that they have that certain niche or something special that helps them stand apart as great presenters, people that put on professional development, and as yourself, sometimes authors. So what in your mind sets music educators apart to be able to be great presenters and writers and speakers?
Hmm. Well, I think music as a discipline in and of
Mhm.
itself requires us to be in front of an audience, and
Yeah.
music is meant to be heard. So I think we have that kind of edge from other disciplines because we are literally meant to be in front of other people, to play and to be heard and to share. Now it's just a matter of changing mediums. If you're going to be doing presenting, it's not necessarily with an instrument, but you're still taking on that same role of engaging an audience and sharing ideas and sharing experience on your from your craft with them. And I think another part of it is just practice. From what I've learned over the past several years, I'm not the best public speaker, but what I've had to do is sit and write down everything that I want to talk about, so that my mind doesn't go completely blank,
Yeah.
and I have some resemblance of, okay, exactly what I'm going to say up on stage. And even if I miss, a line or two here and there, at least I have a general idea.
Hmm.
And I think an interesting and educational concert requires us as music educators to talk to um, our audience and let them know about what happened in the classroom that developed this piece from one point to the next, why this piece was important to us, what we learned, all those things that you generally want to tell your audience, so that they get a little bit more context and appreciation for what you're playing. I think it just requires that practice and that intentionality before you get up on stage. So I think that's a big part of it too, just the practice of it.
Hmm. And also, you have that longevity piece. If you're at a school for a while, you see the growth in students. I've taught
Mhm.
French, and so if kids take that over several years, you see that growth as well. But like, if you're teaching just seventh grade language arts, for example, you don't really see that. So as a band or orchestra teacher, like especially K-12 in the same school, you're definitely seeing growth and having that connection with the student last for many years.
Yeah, that's one of the privileges of being in a program I'm in. You really get to see development from the beginning stages, and me particularly because I'm at a K through 12 school. So
Mhm.
I see the kids in fifth grade and I go with them all the way through 12th grade, which is really cool. I get to see them grow as people and as musicians, and it's exciting. And it's a unique perspective that I think a lot of academic teachers don't get.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
yeah, I really enjoy that aspect of education as well.
We've talked a lot about your growth as an educator and some of your stories you wrote about in your book, some of your compositions, and how you got started playing music. Out of everything we've discussed on the podcast today, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
Um, I always try and tell myself and my colleagues and my friends that it's important to give yourself grace
Yeah.
in our profession because the profession won't grant it to you. Um, I think it's important to give yourself grace, realize that as an educator, things aren't going to end up and go exactly how you'd like them to go immediately. It's going to take time. It's a process.
Yeah.
Particularly in my field as a music educator, if you're an instrumental director, it takes typically, and I talk about this in the book, about 3 to 5 years to develop a program that is truly yours. So it's not going to happen overnight. So you got to give yourself grace. And then remember that there's no award for the most burnt out and stressed out teacher. So you
Mhm.
got to take care of yourself. There's just no reward. There's no raise. There's no, extra bonus for being the most stressed out and burnt out teacher. So set those boundaries that you need to take care of yourself. And if things fall, it's okay.
Mhm.
It's all right.
Mhm.
As at least you have your health and at least you have your sanity.
Yeah, yeah. And also, like, if you're in a concert and kids mess up, the audience usually does not know. So, you
Right.
know, they might
Yeah.
not know the piece that well. It's like we have a choir concert tomorrow, and it's like, these minimal things, or one person in the choir holds the note too long, in the whole scheme of things, that's not
Right.
going to be like what they remember from the concert. So,
Yeah, your general public isn't a trained musician. They just
yeah,
are out there to enjoy and really soak in what you're putting out there. And most of the time they're rooting for you, so
yeah.
just take it in strides and just enjoy the process.
Yeah, yeah. Well, where can people connect with you and find you online?
So the best way to find me online is through my website. It's adriangordonmusic.com, and everything's there from my travel schedule to my book to my compositions. Anything that you want to know about me, it's up on adriangordonmusic.com.
Great. And are you on social media?
Yeah, I'm on social media. I'm on Facebook. So friend me on Facebook. I'm also on Instagram and
Mhm.
Twitter.
Okay.
And I have a lot of videos up on YouTube if anyone wants to check
Okay.
those out.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being on the Out of the Trenches podcast today. It was a pleasure getting to know you, finding out more about your career and what people can um, get from both compositions and from maybe getting some coaching and guest conducting. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I'm so appreciative of the invitation. Thank you, Dana.